The airport lounge gleamed with luxury. A woman in worn sandals stood quietly at the entrance. "Ma'am, this area is for first class only," the attendant announced loudly. Everyone stared. The woman reached into her bag and slid her passport across the counter. The attendant's face drained of color. "What if the people we dismiss are the ones who matter most? Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments." Welcome back to Sir Alex Stories, where we bring you tales of extraordinary people in ordinary moments. Today, I want to share with you a story about appearances, assumptions, and the quiet power of dignity. A reminder that sometimes the most remarkable people are those who never announce their importance. "Ma'am, this lounge is for first-class passengers only. Please don't make this awkward." The words weren't whispered. They were announced, loud enough for everyone waiting in line to hear. The statement hung in the air, draped with a thin veneer of professionalism that barely concealed the condescension beneath. The woman at whom these words were directed didn't argue. She didn't explain herself. She simply stood still, her weathered canvas bag hanging from one shoulder, comfortable sandals on her feet. But in her silence was a brewing storm, because what the lounge attendant hadn't seen was the name on her passport. Heathrow Airport bustled with its familiar symphony of chaos, delayed flights, announced over crackling speakers, tearful goodbyes exchanged at security checkpoints. Business people marching purposefully with their sleek carry-ons trailing behind them. It was a crossroads of humanity where lives intersected briefly before diverging again across the globe. Dr. Eleanor Grace Bennett had just landed from a humanitarian mission in South Sudan. The 16-hour journey had left creases in her beige trench coat that matched the fine lines around her eyes. Both earned through years of bearing witness to humanity at its worst and its best. She traveled as she always did, practically. No designer luggage, no carefully curated airport outfit for social media, just comfortable clothes that could withstand the unforgiving heat of refugee camps and the frigid air conditioning of international conferences alike. She stepped into the queue for the first-class global lounge. Her diplomatic passport held in hands that had recently bandaged wounds, signed peace accords, and comforted orphaned children. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. Just another traveler trying to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of one of the world's busiest airports. The woman at the counter, immaculately made up with not a hair out of place, her name tag reading Kristen, Guest Experience Manager, looked Eleanor over, once taking in the wrinkled coat, the practical sandals, the canvas bag with its faded United Nations emblem. The assessment took no more than 3 seconds, but in that brief moment, judgments were made, conclusions were drawn, and Eleanor's worth was calculated. "Ma'am," Kristen began, her voice carrying the practiced melody of customer service, but with a subtle, sharp edge. "Economy check-in is downstairs. This lounge is exclusively for premium ticket holders and authorized UN diplomats." "I am with the UN," Eleanor replied calmly, her voice steady and unperturbed. Kristen raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow, her lips forming a smile that never reached her eyes. "I don't think field volunteers qualify for lounge access. There's a separate processing area for aid workers." "I'm not a volunteer," Eleanor stated simply. "Then perhaps you're lost," Kristen said, her smile fixed in place as she gestured toward the escalator with a manicured hand. "The regular departure gates are one level down." The line behind Eleanor grew restless. A man in a tailored suit that probably cost more than what most people in South Sudan earned in a year leaned toward his wife, whispering loud enough to be overheard. "She's clearly bluffing her way in." A young couple dressed in matching athleisure wear that screamed of comfortable wealth pulled out their phones and began to film the interaction, giggling softly as they provided commentary to their followers. "She thinks they'll let her in with that bag," the woman whispered to her companion, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "This is going to get so many views." What no one in that line knew, what no one could possibly have guessed, was that Dr. Eleanor Grace Bennett had spent the last 2 decades of her life in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. While they had been posting vacation photos and accumulating frequent flyer miles, she had been negotiating ceasefires between warring factions. While they had been complaining about flight delays, she had been evacuating orphaned children from active war zones. While they had been collecting luxury goods, she had been nominated twice for the UN Humanitarian Medal of Valor. Eleanor didn't travel with bodyguards, though her work had earned her numerous death threats. She didn't post her missions on social media, though her diplomatic efforts had shaped international policy. She didn't need people to know her name, though it was spoken with reverence in refugee camps across 3 continents. She only needed to do the work. This wasn't the first time she had been mistaken for less. In fact, it happened with such regularity that she had developed a philosophical perspective on it. Sometimes being underestimated was an advantage in her line of work. It allowed her to move through spaces unnoticed, to listen when others thought she wasn't worth addressing, to understand the dynamics of power by observing how people wielded it against those they deemed insignificant. But this was the first time it would happen so publicly, with an audience recording every moment of her humiliation for their entertainment. Eleanor reached into her canvas bag, the same one that had carried medical supplies through checkpoints and crucial documents through war zones, and retrieved her blue diplomatic passport. Without a word, she slid it across the counter. Kristen glanced at it casually, the way one might look at a flyer handed out on a street corner, a cursory acknowledgement before inevitable dismissal. Then she froze. Her eyes widened as they scanned the embossed golden seal and the printed text beneath it: United Nations, Level 1 Diplomatic Access. Name: Dr. Eleanor Grace Bennett, Global Special Envoy, Authorization Priority. Access: High Security Clearance, Humanitarian Flight Zone, Unrestricted. The color drained from Kristen's face as realization dawned. Her hands, which had been dismissively pushing the passport back, now held it with unexpected reverence. I apologize, Dr. Bennett, she stammered, the practiced smile now completely gone. I didn't realize you didn't ask, Eleanor said quietly, her voice devoid of anger but heavy with the weight of a lesson learned through years of witnessing human suffering caused by such snap judgments. The giggling couple lowered their phones, the recording stopped midstream, the suited man cleared his throat uncomfortably and suddenly became very interested in his own passport. The atmosphere shifted as everyone within earshot realized their complicity in the public humiliation of a woman who had dedicated her life to serving others. A nearby airline employee stepped forward, recognition flashing across his face as he approached. Dr. Bennett, he said with genuine respect, we've been informed of your arrival. A private security escort is waiting for you by Gate 14. The Secretary General's office called ahead. Kristen went pale, her professional demeanor crumbling as she realized the magnitude of her error. Not just a faux pas, but a diplomatic incident involving someone who reported directly to the highest levels of the United Nations. Eleanor nodded politely to the airline employee, accepting the information with grace. But before walking away, she turned back to Kristen, who stood frozen behind the counter, mortified. I'm not offended, Eleanor said, which was both true and untrue. I'm concerned. Kristen blinked, confusion replacing embarrassment on her face. Excuse me? You judge me by what I wore, not by what I've done, Eleanor explained, her voice gentle but firm. That's dangerous, especially in a place like this, where thousands of people pass through every hour, each carrying stories and responsibilities you'll never see if you're only looking at shoes and jackets. The words hung in the air between them, not as an accusation, but as an observation, the kind that Eleanor had become skilled at making in conflict zones where understanding human behavior was often the difference between successful negotiation and catastrophic failure. Kristen swallowed hard. Her professional facade cracked completely, revealing a young woman who suddenly realized she had been playing a role, the important gatekeeper, without understanding the true weight of her position. I'm sorry, truly, she said, her voice now stripped of its earlier condescension. You thought wrong, Eleanor said with unexpected gentleness. We all do sometimes, but what we do after we realize our mistake, that's what matters. In that moment, something passed between the two women, a recognition. Perhaps, Kristen nodded slowly, understanding blooming in her eyes. As Eleanor walked away toward her gate following the airline employee who had come to her rescue, one of the security escorts who had arrived to accompany her whispered, "You handled that with incredible grace, ma'am. Most diplomats I've escorted would have made a scene, demanded the employee be fired." Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, softening the weariness there. "Grace isn't just my name," she replied. "It's a responsibility." And she had seen too many places torn apart by pride, by the need to assert dominance, by the human tendency to elevate oneself by diminishing others. She had walked through the aftermath of such impulses. Villages reduced to ash, hospitals bombed to rubble, children orphaned by violence that began with someone needing to prove their superiority. A small humiliation at an airport counter was nothing compared to what she had witnessed. And perhaps, just perhaps, this moment could become something more than an embarrassment for a thoughtless employee. it could become a lesson. Back at the lounge desk, Kristen quietly removed her name tag that read, Guest Experience Manager, replaced it with one that read, Manager in Training, and sat in silence for a moment. She replayed every judgment she had made that morning, not just about Dr. Bennett, but about the elderly couple she had rushed through check-in, assuming they wouldn't understand the premium services. About the young man in casual clothes she had scrutinized more carefully than his business-suited counterparts. About the woman in a hijab to whom she had spoken more slowly, assuming a language barrier that didn't exist. Each interaction now appeared to her in a new light, not as efficient customer service, but as a series of small injuries inflicted from a position of momentary power. As Dr. Eleanor Bennett settled into her seat on the diplomatic flight that would take her to her next assignment, she opened her worn notebook and began to write. Not about the incident at the airport that was already fading from her mind, but about the patterns she had observed in the conflict zone she had just left, the names of children who needed follow-up medical care, the promises she had made to communities that trusted her to be their voice in distant conference rooms. They had seen a woman with worn shoes and thought she didn't belong, until they saw her passport and realized she belonged more than anyone else. But the truth was more complex than either assumption. Eleanor belonged not because of her diplomatic status, or despite her practical attire. She belonged because she had chosen to make herself belong, to inhabit spaces of suffering and spaces of power, with equal commitment to bridge worlds that rarely intersected except through people like her. As the plane took off, Eleanor looked out the window at London falling away beneath her. Somewhere down there, perhaps Kristen was beginning to understand that the true measure of a person lies not in their appearance or even their credentials, but in how they choose to use whatever power they have, whether it's the power to access exclusive lounges or the power to decide who deserves respect. At first glance, Dr. Eleanor Grace Bennett had learned this lesson in places where mistakes and judgment cost lives. If today in a privileged corner of a first world airport, someone else had begun to learn it too well, that was a small victory in a world that desperately needed more of them. Have you ever been misjudged because of how you looked? Or have you judged someone else before you knew their story? These moments of misunderstanding are universal in our human experience, but they also offer us opportunities for growth and reflection. And remember that everyone you meet carries a story you cannot see at first glance. The quiet woman in simple clothes might be changing the world. The person who doesn't match your idea of success might have achieved things you cannot imagine. This is Sir Alex reminding you that in a world quick to judge by appearances, the greatest strength lies in reserving judgment and approaching each person with the curiosity their unique humanity deserves. Until next time, look deeper. Listen longer, and always remember that dignity often speaks in the quietest voice. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Sir Alex Stories for more narratives that explore the complexity of human connection and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed in our world.